I gave up my dream career to take care of my family, what I didn't expect after my father's death. I always thought I had my life figured out. I was 28, climbing the corporate ladder in the city, a fresh graduate with big dreams. I had a beautiful girlfriend, a promising career, and I felt on top of the world. But everything changed the day I got that call. My father had passed away unexpectedly. What followed wasn't just grief, but a set of challenges that no one could prepare for. It wasn't just about taking over the family business, it was about stepping into a world that I had no idea was waiting for me. I gave up the career I worked so hard for, without fully understanding the consequences. But looking back, I realized the sacrifice didn't stop there. It took more than I could have ever imagined, and I never expected the struggles, heartbreak, and self-discovery that would come along with it. This is the story of how I learned the hard way what it truly means to take responsibility for your family, your future, and your own happiness. The first moment everything changed came when I was sitting in my office. I was on a conference call with a client, closing a major deal that would have secured my spot in the company. And then my phone rang. It was my mom. The moment I picked up, I knew something was wrong. She was crying and all she could say was, "Dad's gone." I don't think anyone is ever ready for that kind of news. It felt like the floor had dropped beneath me. I told myself I would get through this, but when I looked at the city outside my office window, I realized I couldn't do it anymore. My life was about to change. When I flew back home, I had no idea what to expect. The funeral was a blur of faces and empty words. But when the dust settled, there was only one thing left to do: help my mom, my younger sister, and take over the family business. I never planned on it. I had just signed a contract for a job that would have taken me around the world. I was excited, ready to build a future for myself. But suddenly, everything felt trivial. The business my father had spent his life building now rested on my shoulders. My uncle, who worked alongside my father, wasn't much help. He had always been the silent partner, watching from the sidelines. It was nothing like I imagined. There was no glamour in managing a construction company in a small town. Every day, I found myself trying to juggle contracts, employees, and my family's needs. The business was struggling, and my father's absence felt like a hole that couldn't be filled. My uncle expected me to just step in and take charge, but he didn't tell me about the political game of running a family business. He didn't warn me about the competing interests, the employees who wanted to take advantage of my inexperience, or the contracts that were already falling through. It was a world I wasn't ready for. At first, I thought my uncle was there to help me navigate the family business. But it quickly became clear that we had different ideas on how to run things. He was old school, while I wanted to modernize the company. I wanted to bring in new technologies, improve efficiency, and treat our employees with more respect. But he wouldn't budge. He had his way of doing things, and it wasn't long before we were clashing at every turn. The tension between us grew. I started to feel like I was suffocating. My dream of personal success was slipping away as I struggled to keep the business alive and running. I wanted to prove that I could handle it all, but every step felt like 2 steps backward. It didn't take long for the weight of responsibility to set in. I had to deal with the financial strain of the business, the personal issues my family was facing, and the constant pressure to prove myself to my uncle and my employees. But it wasn't just about the business, it was about my family. My mother needed me to be strong. My sister was struggling with the loss of our father, and I was the one who had to hold everything together. As the months went by, I began to realize how much this decision was costing me. I stopped seeing my friends. I stopped spending time with my girlfriend, Sophie, who had always been my support system. The more I focused on the business, the more I neglected my personal life. Sophie started becoming distant. I could tell she was frustrated. She was supportive at first, but over time, I could see the cracks forming in our relationship. She was afraid I was losing myself in this new life, and maybe I was. I didn't have time to fix things with her. The pressure from the business and the family kept me exhausted. And I couldn't escape the feeling that I was letting her down, even though I was doing everything I could to keep my family from falling apart. Running a family business isn't just about balancing the books. It's about navigating the political landscape of people who've been in the game longer than you, people who want control and power. It didn't take long for me to realize how much sexism and manipulation existed in the business world. I found myself in meetings with suppliers and clients who tried to undermine me, questioning my abilities, my decisions. There were even moments when I was flirted with by people who thought they could use my vulnerability to get ahead. It was sickening. It became clear that to survive, I'd need to play their game. But I didn't want to lose myself in it. My father had always done things with integrity, but now I had to figure out how to navigate a world where integrity didn't always win. By this point, I had fully taken over the family business, and the stress was taking its toll. I had no time for myself, no time to think, and no time for the people I loved. The business was doing better, but I was losing everything that mattered to me. I realized that I was trapped in a life I never chose, stuck between my dreams and my family's expectations. I couldn't go back to my career, but I couldn't keep living like this either. After months of struggle, I made a difficult decision. I needed to take a break from it all. I told my uncle I was stepping back for a while, and I went to a small cabin in the mountains to clear my mind. That was when I truly understood the depth of my sacrifice. It wasn't just about giving up a career, it was about giving up my freedom, my peace of mind, and my future. During my time away, I realized that I had been living for everyone else, trying to be the son, the leader, the caretaker, but I had forgotten about myself. I began to rediscover who I was outside of the pressures of the family, the business, and my father's legacy. It wasn't easy, but I started to heal. I started to realize that it wasn't about perfection, and I didn't have to be everything for everyone. I just needed to be me. After months away, I returned to the family business, ready to face my responsibilities head-on. But nothing had prepared me for the shift I felt in myself. The pressure had changed me. My uncle was still there, his eyes sharp, constantly assessing my every move. But I had learned to trust myself more than I had before. The work was still demanding, and I was still unsure of my place in this world. But I had a new sense of resolve. I would no longer allow myself to be dictated by others' expectations. I started making decisions with a clearer mind, and slowly, the business began to reflect that change. Everything seemed to be on track until one day, a huge project came across my desk. A major deal with a corporate client, one that could either make or break the business. It was too big to ignore, and the pressure weighed on me heavily. My uncle was silent but watching. I knew he didn't think I was ready. I had no choice but to push forward, handling negotiations, finances, and the ever-present doubt in my mind. But with each step forward, I felt more alienated from my old life. I missed the city, my friends, and the freedom I once had. The reality of this new life was starting to feel like a cage. Sophie had tried to be understanding during the first few months. She'd supported me when my father died, but over time, the distance grew between us. She wanted me to move forward, but the life I had now felt so different from what we once shared. I stopped seeing her the way I used to. She stopped looking at me the same way too. It became clear that something wasn't right between us. I was always too busy, too preoccupied with the business. I kept putting her last, and it slowly pushed us apart. Then, one night, she told me she couldn't keep waiting for me to figure things out. We needed a break. I needed a break, and so did she. My uncle's quiet approval quickly turned into a battle for control. He wanted to run things the way my father had, old school, conservative, and stubborn. I wanted change. I wanted growth. It wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about the future of my family. I had made a choice, and I couldn't go back. But when my uncle made a move to override my decisions, it felt like a betrayal. I had to stand my ground for the first time. The conflict with my uncle started to seep into our personal lives. Family dinners turned into awkward silences. The business was competing with our family bond, and every decision I made was questioned. Was I doing this for my father? Or was I doing it for myself? I started questioning my ability to lead the company. The weight of my family's legacy felt more like a burden than a gift. But through this pain, I realized something. If I wanted this to work, I needed to redefine the legacy. In the middle of all the stress, I had a moment of weakness. I had just signed a contract that I knew was risky. When I went out for a drink to clear my head, I found myself in the arms of a woman who seemed to understand my struggles. One night turned into a string of rendezvous. I tried to justify it to myself. I deserved this after everything I was doing for the family. But the guilt consumed me. I was betraying the very principles I was trying to uphold. The reality of my decisions began to hit me, and I knew I had to confront my own behavior. I couldn't escape it forever. I couldn't avoid my uncle anymore. We had built up so much resentment and frustration over the past year. One night, we had an argument that shook everything. I confronted him about his constant interference and his lack of trust in my decisions. He fired back, accusing me of being naive and impatient. The tension between us hit its peak. That was when I realized we couldn't keep running the business this way. Either I would walk away from everything, or we would have to change things. There was no middle ground. After much reflection, I made the hardest decision of my life. I told my uncle I wanted to take full control of the company. I was no longer willing to work under his shadow, and the time had come for me to lead. The decision was a gamble. If it failed, I knew I would lose everything. My family, my future, my dignity. But in that moment, I realized that I had nothing left to lose. Taking control wasn't easy. Every day felt like a battle to prove myself to everyone. My uncle, the employees, and myself. But for the first time, I began to believe in my decisions. I learned to trust my instincts, and slowly, the business started thriving. However, the personal cost was high. I found myself alone most nights, consumed by the weight of my choices. I couldn't escape the loneliness that came with the success I was building. After months of silence, Sophie reached out. She told me that she had seen a change in me. She saw that I was finally taking responsibility for my life. Our conversation was long and full of emotional highs and lows. But when I looked at her, I realized how much I had taken her for granted. We both needed time, but this was a step forward. I wasn't sure what would happen between us, but I was willing to try again. Just when I thought things were stabilizing, the company faced a financial crisis. Several bad investments, unpaid debts, and employee strikes threatened everything. I was in over my head, and I felt the weight of every mistake I made. I was at my breaking point, but I realized that I had to make the hard choices, even if they hurt. This time, there was no one else to blame. It was my responsibility. After the crisis, I realized the only way to move forward was to completely restructure the business. It was time to embrace technology, innovation, and new ideas. But it wasn't easy. There was resistance, especially from my uncle, who feared change. But I knew it was the only way to survive. This was my fight to prove that I wasn't just running a business. I was building a legacy that could thrive in the modern world. In the midst of the chaos, I found my true purpose. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about family. I rebuilt relationships with my mom, my sister, and even my uncle. Slowly but surely, I started to feel a sense of balance that I hadn't felt in years. I still had a long way to go, but I was on the right path. There was a moment when I realized that forgiveness wasn't just for others, it was for me. I had carried around so much guilt for not being there for Sophie, for my mistakes in the business, for all the things I had done wrong. But I couldn't move forward until I let go of that anger. Forgiveness wasn't easy, but it freed me in ways I didn't expect. With the business back on track, I began to look at my future differently. The struggle had taught me more about myself than I could ever have imagined. I wasn't the same person I was when I left my dream job. I had grown, evolved, and found a deeper sense of purpose. Sophie and I decided to take things slow, but there was a sense of hope in the air. I wasn't sure where we were headed, but we were finally on the same page. The road to rebuilding trust wasn't easy. Sophie and I had a lot of deep conversations about the past, and slowly, we started to rebuild. I realized that success didn't just come from the work I did. It came from the people I loved and the relationships I nurtured. Trust was something we both needed to work on. I started investing in myself. I took up hobbies I had long neglected, started reading books on self-improvement, and sought therapy to better understand my feelings of insecurity and fear. It was important to me that I wasn't just successful in business, but that I was also a healthy, grounded person. By this point, I knew the most important thing in my life wasn't my career, it was my family. I made a promise to myself that no matter what happened, I would always put my family first. No job, no financial success would ever take their place. The final test came when the company faced another crisis, one that could end everything I had worked for. But this time I was prepared. I had the experience, the wisdom, and the strength to make the right decisions. It was a defining moment for me. I finally understood what it meant to lead with compassion, to make decisions not just for the bottom line, but for the people around me. As I looked back on everything, I realized that my journey wasn't just about sacrifice. It was about growth. It was about learning who I was, what I stood for, and what I was capable of. In the end, the legacy I built wasn't just about business. It was about family, honor, and self-discovery.